A courtroom, a magistrate, and an old woman on trial that day. Everyone thought they knew who she was when she walked in, dressed in worn-out clothes, leaning on her walking stick. Most assumed she was just another defendant. But no one knew the truth. The magistrate mocked her, laughed at her, dismissed her as a nobody. But one phone call was about to change everything. Because this old woman was far more than she seemed, and with just one call, the justice system would be shaken, the balance of power flipped. Magistrate Eleanor Vance humiliates old woman in court until she makes a phone call to her son. The truth will hit like a thunderclap, and nothing will ever be the same again. In Courtroom 5 of the Riverbend District Court, the ticking of the old wall clock echoed through the air. It had just struck 9. The crowded courtroom was filled with murmurs as people settled into their seats, some whispering about various cases, others waiting impatiently for their turn. Magistrate Eleanor Vance, sitting at the bench, impatiently flipped through the case files in front of her. She adjusted her glasses and leaned slightly forward, her sharp gaze swept over the crowd in the courtroom. Known for her discipline and feared for her harsh rulings, she had no tolerance for weakness, excuses, or disrespect. The court clerk stood and read aloud, his voice resonating, "The State versus Martha Evans, charge, trespassing on private property." When the large doors of the courtroom swung open, everyone turned to look. Silence quickly turned to a different kind of tension. The defendant who entered didn't fit the profile of a typical criminal. Martha Evans, the elderly woman, stepped inside slowly, wearing an old but impeccably clean coat. She leaned slightly on her walking stick, her walk measured, as though every step was deliberate. Her tired but sharp eyes scanned the room. Her white hair, deep wrinkles, and slightly hunched posture revealed her age. Whispers rose among the spectators. A few lawyers compared the defendant's file with the documents in their hands. Some shook their heads, while others exchanged puzzled glances. Who is this woman? Why had she been found on private property? Magistrate Vance, surveying the old woman, placed an amused smile on her face. What was this woman doing here? Was she just another pitiful criminal who had crossed her path before, or was she simply an elderly woman who had had too much to drink and gotten lost? Sighing deeply, she spoke, "Ms. Evans," her voice resonated in the courtroom, "this is the second time you've been caught trespassing on private property. You've been to court for this before. Why repeat the same mistake after being warned the first time?" Martha Evans lifted her head slightly and met the magistrate's gaze. She didn't seem like a frightened, defeated woman. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "it wasn't a mistake for me." The silence in the courtroom deepened for a moment. The magistrate furrowed her brows. "What do you mean?" The elderly woman leaned on her walking stick a bit more, took a deep breath, and continued, "As you know, the Willow Creek estate was open to the public for many years. I spent my childhood by that lake. My father was the groundskeeper there. Every Sunday we'd go there and fish together." Magistrate Vance sighed and closed the file. She had heard this kind of nostalgic story many times before. Criminals always had endless excuses. "Ms. Evans," she said sternly, "it is illegal to trespass on private property. What happened in the past doesn't matter. That place is no longer public. It's been sold. So your being there is against the law." Martha smiled and nodded. "I know, Your Honor." The magistrate's eyes narrowed. "If you know, then why were you there?" Martha shrugged slightly. "Sometimes you have to go back to see certain things." Whispers grew louder in the courtroom. The magistrate shifted uncomfortably in her seat. What was this old woman implying? The magistrate slammed her hand on the bench. "Don't distract me with your philosophy, Ms. Evans. Why did you go there?" After a brief silence, Martha spoke, "Because there's something you need to know, Your Honor." This response caused a small stir in the courtroom. Magistrate Vance quickly raised her hand, silencing the whispers. Though she didn't know what this old woman was implying, she knew she had to remain in control. "Ms. Evans, this is a courtroom. If you've broken the law, there will be consequences." She quickly flipped through the file and took off her glasses, placing them harshly on the table. "So, where is your lawyer?" she asked. Martha calmly shook her head. "I don't need a lawyer." The magistrate raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Are you defending yourself?" "No, I'm not defending myself," Martha said, her voice so calm that a new silence fell over the courtroom. Magistrate Vance frowned. What was this old woman up to? "Ms. Evans," she said sharply, "I don't understand why you're so relaxed. If you don't follow the rules, you'll face the consequences. What do you think the punishment will be for this case?" Martha smiled faintly. "Can I make a phone call?" A murmur rose in the courtroom. Who is this old woman? Who was she going to call? The magistrate leaned forward, hands on the bench, and spoke in a stern voice, Ms. Evans, you don't have the right to make a phone call in this courtroom. Martha squinted. If I'm going to serve 30 days in jail, at least I'd like to inform my son. At this sentence, the entire courtroom froze. Magistrate Vance paused for a moment, rolling her eyes. Fine, but let's end this nonsense quickly. Martha picked up the phone, dialed a number quickly, and spoke in a clear, steady voice, David, it's time for you to come. Everyone in the courtroom looked at each other. Who was David, and why was this woman so calm? No one could quite understand what was happening. Magistrate Eleanor Vance shook her head with an impatient expression. This elderly woman was acting as though she were in the middle of some game. All right, Ms. Evans, she said coldly, if we're done with this little display, can we get back to your case? Martha nodded slightly, but said nothing. Just then, the doors of the courtroom swung open quickly. All eyes turned to the door. The person who entered was a man whose wealth and power were apparent in every movement. He wore a long black coat, and the sound of his expensive shoes echoed on the wooden floor. Behind him, two men in dark suits followed, each carrying a black leather briefcase. The man walked straight to Martha Evans and gently touched her shoulder. Mom, are you all right? Everyone in the room was stunned. David Evans, the CEO of Evanson Holdings, the head of one of the country's largest investment firms. A murmur rose in the courtroom. Spectators whispered in astonishment. Magistrate Vance's face suddenly tightened. She knew that name. David walked to the front of the courtroom, looking directly into the magistrate's eyes. Your Honor, I saw how you treated my mother. David placed a thick file on the table. The magistrate's face turned hard as she pressed her lips together. She didn't know where this was going, but she could feel she was losing control. Mr. Evans, she said, trying to keep her voice as authoritative as possible, it's procedurally improper for you to appear suddenly in this court. If you wish to testify as a witness, you must follow the proper procedure. David narrowed his eyes. Your Honor, this is not testimony. It's a reckoning. A slight hum rose in the room. Everyone realized they were no longer watching a regular case. David opened the file and pulled out a document. Your Honor, I'd like to show you some truths about my mother's financial situation. The magistrate's color drained. David read aloud from the document, Martha Evans is the founder and honorary chairwoman of Evanson Holdings. Suddenly, there was a stir in the courtroom. Spectators whispered in disbelief. Magistrate Vance cleared her throat and carefully examined the file. This couldn't be. Was this elderly woman the founder of Evanson Holdings? Martha Evans, a billionaire, and had she just humiliated her as if she were a poor beggar? The silence in the court had become breathless. It was clear who Martha Evans truly was. Magistrate Vance, drenched in cold sweat, stared at the files, but she couldn't read a thing. To learn that the elderly woman she had just humiliated was actually a billionaire businesswoman was devastating for her. But it wasn't over yet. David fixed the magistrate with a hard stare and began to speak. I know what you're thinking, Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying unwavering seriousness. You thought my mother had done something wrong. You underestimated her. But what I'm about to tell you will completely change the course of this case. A wave of curiosity spread through the room. David pulled a document from his purse and handed it to the court officer. The officer hesitated, but then walked it over to the magistrate. When Vance glanced at the document, her face drained of color. David took a deep breath and made his bombshell revelation. This is the paperwork for the sale of the Willow Creek estate. It shows that my mother was in the process of purchasing this property. The courtroom erupted with sounds of astonishment. The magistrate adjusted her glasses in disbelief. What did you say? David's gaze hardened even further. Yes, my mother was in negotiations to buy this property. She wanted to visit the estate twice before the sale was finalized. It was the place where she spent her childhood, where her father worked, and a part of our family history. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. David continued in a firm tone, my mother visited this land twice to inspect it. During these visits, she was thrown out by security and reported to the police. Despite telling everyone that she was in the process of purchasing the estate, no one listened to her. Magistrate Vance's eyes widened. Was Martha Evans arrested for visiting a property she was about to buy? David pulled out a second document from the file and placed it in front of the magistrate. These are the notarized documents confirming that the sale will go through. Even though we presented these documents before the case, my mother was still not taken seriously. She tried to explain, but no one wanted to listen. You looked at her appearance, assumed she was poor, that she was a vagrant wandering around. The whispers in the room quickly turned into rising anger. Some lawyers shook their heads and talked amongst themselves. How could such a massive misunderstanding have happened? Magistrate Vance's breath caught. She felt her authority slipping away. Just minutes ago, she had spoken to this woman in a condescending tone, and now she realized that Martha Evans had been dragged to court over a property she was in the process of buying. David turned to his mother, and anyone looking at his face could see that he was struggling to keep his anger in check. He turned back to the magistrate and delivered his harshest statement yet. Your Honor, not only did you bring my mother here over a misunderstanding, but you also humiliated her, calling her poor. I will be suing you for this. Magistrate Vance's face drained even further. David continued, her gaze never leaving the magistrate's. After you make your decision about my mother. The room fell completely silent. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a live example of one of the greatest issues in the justice system. It seemed that Martha Evans wasn't the one on trial anymore. Now the real defendant was Magistrate Vance. The silence in the courtroom was sharp and heavy, like a knife cutting through the air. Magistrate Eleanor Vance was shaken by David Evans' words. I will sue you as soon as you make a decision about my mother. That sentence had completely shattered the magistrate's authority. Just a few minutes ago, she had thought she was facing a defenseless, poor, and insignificant old woman. Now she had learned that Martha Evans was a billionaire businesswoman and had been dragged to court for visiting a property she was in the process of buying. And even worse, because she hadn't taken the Evans family seriously, they were now preparing to sue her. This could be the end of her career. Magistrate Vance leaned slightly forward in her chair, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe her sweat. Anyone watching could see that she no longer appeared as authoritative as before. A court officer cleared his throat lightly. Your Honor, you need to make a ruling on the defendant. Vance lifted her head and remained silent for a few seconds. Then, as if trying to gather herself, she took a deep breath. The court dismisses all charges against Martha Evans. Whispers rose from every corner of the courtroom. Vance raised her voice slightly, the defendant is found not guilty. Suddenly, a wave of hidden relief spread across the room. Martha Evans didn't move from her spot, her eyes were locked directly with the magistrate's. Finally, the magistrate turned to Martha and spoke reluctantly, Ms. Evans, I apologize for the time you've spent in this court. But there was no sign of satisfaction in Martha's eyes. Apologize, the old woman said slowly, your apology doesn't change what happened here, Your Honor. David stepped in, especially the fact that you humiliated my mother for being poor. Magistrate Vance looked away. She realized that she had completely lost control of the situation. But David wasn't finished. He was waiting to deliver the final blow that would shake the courtroom to its core. He pulled out another document from the file and placed it in front of the magistrate. And here's one last piece of information for you, Your Honor, he said, his voice as cold as ice. Magistrate Vance shakily opened the document. As her eyes scanned the lines, her face paled even more. What she read was a nightmare for her. David, maintaining his calm demeanor, explained, Evanson Holdings has been running a special justice fund to provide financial support to courts for the last 6 months. And what a coincidence, one of the biggest donors to this fund is none other than the Riverbend District Court. Shocked sounds rose from the courtroom. David continued, in other words, Your Honor, even the bench you sit on is funded by my mother's company. The magistrate's hands started to tremble. This was impossible. David narrowed his eyes, and you had the audacity to humiliate a woman like my mother for being poor. Martha Evans took a deep breath, leaned on her walking stick, and stood up. Her smile carried a deep wisdom and a slight hint of disappointment. You know, Your Honor, she said, I came here to see how justice works. The courtroom was completely silent. Martha shook her head, and what I saw didn't surprise me at all. Because justice changes depending on how thick a man's wallet is. Then slowly, she looked into the magistrate's eyes, but here's where you made your mistake, Magistrate Vance. Vance swallowed quietly. Martha lowered her head slightly and smiled, you thought I was poor. She paused for a moment before finishing her words, and at that moment, you stopped trying to understand who I really am. The courtroom was so still that no one dared to even breathe. This was no mere misunderstanding, this was the revelation of the corruption at the heart of the justice system. And now everyone was aware of it. David turned to his mother and slowly slipped his arm through hers. Let's go now, Mom. Martha Evans stood tall and nodded. When the courtroom doors opened, it was clear the press was waiting outside, and that day, while one magistrate's career ended, a revolution had begun. Sometimes a story is more than just a story, it's a lesson, a revelation, a reckoning. 4 new gripping and emotional stories every day. Subscribe now. We uncover the truth, the justice, and the most shocking twists. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and be the first to uncover the next big secret.